Mary, you're giving us a master class in sort of the department's capacity for adapting. But do you see any merit to this move legally by Donald Trump in seeking a special master? I mean, the government is looking for its classified material. The National Archives started by looking for all of them, but the subpoena was specifically trying to get the classified material back. What possible executive privilege could there be for a classified report on the drone program?
So obviously, and I think this is a good point, and I think that's the stuff the special master can give back immediately. If it is original intelligence products, right? There's no way it's going to be subject to executive privilege. If it's a communication that Donald Trump had with a top White House aide about classified, that's someplace where maybe a special master would flag it. Now, put aside that we have issues with a former president asserting executive privilege against the executive, so we don't have a separation of powers issue here. All we have is a presidential communications issue, and we know that even though the Supreme Court has indicated that a former president might raise that type of issue, we know that it is diminished when you are a former president. And so, I think there's, even to the extent that there are communications about classified information that maybe a special master would flag, I think the department will have good interest or good arguments why its compelling interest in the criminal investigation outweigh those interests. And not to mention, of course, the matter that Charlie raised about use in a criminal investigation. Even a sitting president has a limited executive privilege when it's for documents used in a criminal investigation. So all of the case law really bodes against this kind of delay.
Charlie, let me come back to you and ask you if you have any reporting that indicates what this process looks like inside DOJ. I imagine they're weighing some of the very things Mary just educated our viewers about.
I imagine they are too, but they're being quite battening down the hatches right now. They're extremely worried about leaks and being accused of leaks and so forth. They've been accused of leaks maybe when the sources of information might have come from people who received subpoenas or their lawyers or people that knew them as opposed to government. Nevertheless, they get accused of it. And so they're not talking right now. But I do think that there's undoubtedly a lot of anger about the content of the opinion based on what all the outside law professor types and specialists I spoke to yesterday had to say about it. At the same time, I think they're probably thinking about through these very complicated strategic issues that Mary just outlined about whether it may be best to just sort of bite their lip and take it so that the special master can get going and get done rather than opening the door for an infinitely receding series of delays.
Frank, let me show you. I think that I played it a little bit, but Bill Barr's comments seem to focus on the substance of the case, which is what makes it so shocking, frankly, in the body of public utterances of one Bill Barr, who once likened DOJ officials to Montessori preschoolers, was gleeful in putting his fingers on the scale in every phase of the process for Trump's allies. But his arguments have been about the strength of the government's case, and they sound very much like former officials we've had here. Let me show you what Sue Gordon said about Trump's conduct.
So the first thing I would say, there is zero defense. I cannot imagine a defense for the situation in which we find ourselves. There's just none. There is no justification. There's no excuse. No defense, zero, from a national security and from a person involved. Motivation is a much harder thing to ascribe, and I'm usually loath to say what I think other people are thinking. My experience is that the former president has his agenda, and he will use whatever is at his disposal to advance that.
So again, Rick, that's the former number two, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence for this country. She was in the room with Donald Trump as he, shall we say, received intel. It's not clear he processed intel. She seems to believe that he never really comprehended what an intelligence product was made of, what went into it, and maybe that was why he didn't protect it like any other normal policymaker. But what she does put back into this conversation that I think is important for all three of you is that time is not our friend from a national security perspective. There have been reports that Mar-a-Lago is very porous, shall we say. Someone pretending to be a Rothschild got in and took pictures with Trump and Lindsey Graham playing golf. It's not clear that the Trump, whatever they are, legal team or the lawyers around him have been telling the truth about the disposition of any of this classified material. And now we have this judge's ruling. Where is sort of your alarm about the national security implications of a delay?
Well, my national security alarm went off when we first learned of documents at Mar-a-Lago, and it's still ringing. Look, this issue of motivation is interesting because we will never, as Sue Gordon said, we'll never quite get inside the head of Donald Trump as to why those documents even showed up at Mar-a-Lago. But let's assume, just for the sake of argument, that he is a hoarder, as many people say, and he just thumbed his nose at regulations and decided, yeah, I'm taking them anyway, and we're going to Florida. After that, the motivation seems even clearer to me. It's less murky, which is, I think, as Sue Gordon referred to, this serves a purpose for him. He's essentially been holding these documents hostage. Somewhere along the line, it popped into his head, and this is just me thinking about him based on his track record, that this is capital. He's got something of value now. And it's of value even politically to him to thumb his nose at the repeated entreaties of DOJ and the National Archives. So pretty please give this back. And boy, now we have a subpoena. And, we did a site visit and, thanks for the coffee. And can you please make sure this is secure while we're figuring this out? He decided, you know what? It's not too bad if they end up coming down here. It's not bad. I can make some hay out of this politically. And so I think he is using it for that agenda. Now, do I think there may be far more nefarious uses that I hope to God haven't come to fruition yet? Yeah, possibly so. But that's where the motivation, I think, for me comes in, is he wanted this to happen and he's milking it for all it's worth.
Mary, for 5 years, everyone failed to apply the post-9/11 theory of a failure of imagination when it came to Donald Trump. And I wonder if you could just, as a thought exercise, he's had this big, and it would seem, based on all the reporting, unexpected bonanza in front of Judge Eileen Connor in court. What do you think his next legal move would be, and what does the Justice Department have to prepare to defend against?
Well, typically in these types of scenarios, his legal maneuver is delay. I think that was the primary reason that the request for a special master was made to begin with. Remember, it didn't even come in until 2 weeks after the search. And even though there's an indication that from the government that Trump's lawyers reached out the day after the search to request it, they didn't hustle into court when DOJ said no to that. So I think they probably thought through, well, okay, this will be a good way to potentially delay things. And I think one thing that they're thinking about in terms of if the department does appeal is that if the department appeals and prevails, then they would probably try to go to the Supreme Court on a cert petition, delaying yet again. So, I think that because this delay, first of all, delays the inevitable, which is, the ongoing conclusion of the criminal investigation, possible charges. It also gives the former president constantly something to speak about on the campaign trail. And we saw that, sadly, this weekend, him really using this for his own political advantage. And we've seen him also, as we have all seen, attacking the FBI, attacking the Department of Justice, and using that to play to his base. And so the legal team, I think, will be constantly looking for ways to thwart the investigation through different types of litigation tactics that delay, and that, again, gives the former president something to campaign on.
Mary, just really quickly, is this, in your view, an unprecedented sort of climate for DOJ to carry out an investigation? I mean, you're talking about the attacks over the weekend. They're unprecedented and shocking at a moment when he knows, because he's been told, that there are threats against the FBI. He handpicked Chris Wray to run the FBI. It's not any world in which he can say that these are people he doesn't know or hostile to him. He knows them. He was briefed by them. They protected the country while he was the president. What is it like right now to be inside DOJ or the FBI with the former president attacking you?
Well, obviously I'm not there. I can just say based on my experience, nothing's ever been quite like this. This is really sui generis. This is a case that stands on its own. We haven't seen this before, but Department of lawyers have been under fire in other cases. And department lawyers, first of all, the ones working on this are really, really busy. My guess is they're not looking at Twitter. They're not looking at MSNBC. They're not looking at much media, right? They are probably working pretty much 24/7. And when I was there, my experience working with others is you are putting your head down and you're doing your work day in and day out, and you are not worried overly about the threats out there. Now, that doesn't mean that it wouldn't make people nervous for their families, for their personal safety. And I am sure that there are assessments of that within the department that are going on right now to ensure the safety of, of all of the lawyers and agents who are working on this. But this MO from the former president, I mean, we've seen this over and over again, right? Because he will do anything for his own political gain, no matter who gets hurt. He might be on the side of law and order one day, but when that's not helping him, then law and order is the enemy. And, he might be on the side of, encouraging people to come to the Capitol on January 6th to prevent a fraud in the vote, as he claimed, disingenuously and without any evidence to back it up. But then, he's perfectly happy to see them take the hit, lose their jobs, lose their reputations, and move right on. So, this is part of what he does.